Hi, Jacqueline.
Oh, hello. Sorry,
Hi.
I was on mute.
I don't want to take too much time in this
Hi,
session, but I
Claudie.
just posted the link for the recordings there and the evaluation form for you already, eh? So they can just click on that. You can just explain to them about the link. And then,
All
of
right,
course, the
thank
one-on-one sessions, they must do the one-on-one sessions.
Okay, no problem.
I started the recording, so you can go ahead. If you need anything, you can just contact me.
Thanks, Claudine.
Okay, bye.
Okay, bye. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are all well and have had a good weekend and a good Monday. So I think we'll get started in the next maybe 2 minutes. So let's just give everyone else a chance to join us. In the meantime, thank you for the student numbers. I see they are coming into the chat. Yeah, I think let's give everyone else a few minutes to join us. Right. Okay. Good afternoon again, everyone. Yeah, I think let's get started so that we can finish by 7, because yeah, I have realized that it is a bit difficult for sorry, for some of us to stay beyond 7. So I think I'm going to try to just reduce the time that we spend. Okay, so for the benefit of the record and for those who do watch, yeah, and for those who may be new, we all know this process by now. If you would please just add your student number to the chat as we start. And if you are wanting to comment, raise questions, make additions, you're so welcome to do that by just adding it in the chat or raising the hand icon, and I will recognize you. You can unmute and just share your thoughts with us. That is usually quite nice when students do that in the other sessions. So I encourage that. And in the chat box, you'll see that there are a few links. So Claudine has posted the links to previous recordings, especially for those who missed out maybe on Wednesday's session. We did Unit 6 on Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken. We did Unit 6 on Wednesday, and yes, the recordings are there for you to catch up if you were not able to make it for that session. And we also have the evaluation or the feedback form in the chat box there. Cool. So if there are no questions, I think we'll get started with, just Unit 5. With the recap of we'll get started with a recap of Unit 5, which is what we did on Wednesday. Amy, at this point, I have not received information about the exams. I believe that there was a message posted in the chat. Let me just see if I can find it, about preparing for online exams. that was posted there, but in terms of specific details on the exams for this module, unfortunately, I don't have that information. Your best bet would be to try and contact the lecturer about that, because I've not received any information. Okay. So with Unit 5 last week, we looked at the researching and said that the research design really saw the role of a blueprint. For example, if you're building a house, the first thing you need is a plan, right? A blueprint of the house, what exactly you want the house to look, because that will then determine how we go about building the house and what materials we get and what our timeline will be like. So that becomes very important to establish at the beginning of the research process. And we said that we do have different types of research designs that can be made, and a key distinction between them is having a precise versus flexible design. And I wonder if those of you who were in the session Wednesday, if you can maybe remind us what a precise versus a flexible research design looks like. Exactly. Thank you, Sandra. So the precise design is more strict. It really is quite rigid, and you put down the plan and you basically do not deviate from the plan. You stick to the plan for as far as possible. With regards to the flexible design, you give yourself some room to move and to be flexible according to the circumstances and just various situational factors that arise. So if you do find that you planned to interview 20 people, but for some reason you could only get 15, the flexible design allows you to make that adjustment and say, okay, I can only get 15, so I'm going to work with a 15. Whereas a rigid or a precise design would actually say, unfortunately, I need to find these extra 5 people, come hell or high water. So that's the difference there. And then we said that even though the flexible design sounds really chilled, if I can say that, it still needs to be coherent. And we talked about design coherence. And we said that research design that is coherent shows a unity of thought or purpose. So even though I am open to circumstantial factors, I still, my research design still needs to show that, you know, all the decisions I'm making are flowing from one point of departure. There's one thought that is, or one paradigm that is influencing the decisions I make in my study. And then we looked at design validity in quantitative research, and then we also looked at it in qualitative research. Yeah. And we said, you know, design validity really looks at, you know, the extent to which the study confirms the existence of a cause-effect relationship. So this is in relation to quantitative research. Most of it is trying to show that, okay, is there a relationship between smoking and cancer, you know? So with validity, we're trying to see that, okay, there is this relationship that we say there is. And we looked at internal versus external validity. for both quantitative and qualitative research. I unfortunately I can't spend too much time on this. I know that a lot of us were not here on Wednesday, but yeah, I will encourage you to go and maybe watch the recording or just run through the unit once more. So then we talked about the various types of research designs that we do get. In quantitative research, and we looked at true and a pre-experimental design, quasi-experimental design, and a single case experimental design, and single case experiments. So if anyone has any burning questions around these types of designs, you can please ask now. Please yeah, let us know now so that we can chat through them. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that we're all okay with it and move on. So I'll just give you a minute to think about that and see if we all understand it. Maybe if I ask, because this is probably the one that will come up the most, is what is a true experimental design? What are the characteristics of a true experimental design? Can you guys all hear me? Sorry, I think I must have lost connection there for a minute. Can someone please confirm if you guys can hear me? Okay. All right. Thank you. So, does anyone remember the characteristics of a true experimental design? I think if we can remember this, it makes it easier to grasp the others, because they really are just additions to the true experimental design or variations of true experimental designs. Okay, it doesn't look like it. So, okay, I'll leave that to you guys to maybe just read through that once more. If there are any questions, and if you want us to, especially those who were not in our session, if you do want to chat through it, please book a one-on-one consultation with me, and then we can run through all of these types of designs, because they do come up quite a lot in the exams. And then we looked at qualitative research designs. Okay, I see Jessica says the researcher manipulates the treatment condition. In other words, the research controls the research being done. Yes, that is one of the experimental characteristics. Sorry. One of the characteristics of an experimental design is the manipulation of a treatment condition, right? Where the researcher is changing the natural circumstances in which something occurs so that they can judge and see if, you know, a particular treatment that has been administered actually yields the results that was assumed. Yeah, so it has experiential group and a control group, exactly. So a true experimental design will always have two groups. Our experimental group is the group that we give the treatment to. And then our control group is the one that does not receive a treatment. If all of this sounds very new to you, please read through Unit 5. Or or book a consultation session with myself. Sorry, guys, I'm not at 100% today, but we move on. Okay, and then we also looked at qualitative research designs. We looked at some of the key issues in that around validity and how do we determine, you know, validity, external, internal validity. And with that, we looked at things such as the scope, the design flexibility, and the research relationship. I'm not going to go into that, unfortunately, but we must move on. Okay. So today is quite an exciting topic. We're looking at sampling, and we know that, or I don't know if I can say that we know that. Yes, so sampling essentially, if you'll follow with me in the study unit, you know, we're told that we sample every day, right? We go to a particular Sorry, I think my network is not working with us today. So sorry about that. So essentially we sample every day where we find instances of a situation or of a phenomena and we make conclusions out of it, right? So sampling is the same thing. It's really this process of selecting certain instances or certain people to represent the whole group. So example, that Pick and Pay example, I went to this Pick and Pay in Canal Walk, and every time I go there, the cashier that I get is really nice. So then I can take that sample, if it was maybe 5 times, and say, I'm going to basically generalize this experience to all the Pick and Pay cashiers and say, all Pick and Pay cashiers are quite nice. So it's a generalization, but the act of sampling itself is when we're selecting a group of people to represent a broader group of people. So sampling may in fact provide a more accurate picture of the people being researched than we're researching the entire population. So what we mean by that is that if we're wanting to study something, in most cases we have what we call a population. I think I'll just go there. We have what we call a population, and the population is the whole group of people or instances that we are trying to study. So if I'm trying to study cashiers, Pick and Pay cashiers, that's my population. That means all cashiers at all Pick and Pay stores is my population. So what happens is, yes, so that's the population, and it says here that a population can be defined as the entire group of persons or set of objects and events that the researcher wants to study. So a population will contain all the variables of interest to the researcher. So yeah, I'm looking at all Pick n Pay cashiers. That's my population. And if we think about that already, it's going to be such a huge number, because how many Pick n Pays are there, you know, in the world or in the country? How many Pick n Pays are in your city, and how many cashiers does each of those Pick n Pays have? So if we just think about it logically, it'll be almost impossible for us to be able to question and interview all of those cashiers. So what we then want to get is a sample, or just a subset or a small group that can represent all the other cashiers that we're not able to get. Right, and with the population, we have what we call a criteria. The researcher needs to then very specifically define and determine what the criteria is. So sure, I can say Pick n Pay cashiers, but that's not very defined, because it's a really broad characteristics, right? So maybe we'll bring it down and define it a lot more and say Pick n Pay cashiers with at least 5 years experience between so and such age, a bit more, and we're able to then choose samples from that defined population. We also have what we call in the accessible population. So we're told that the whole population would be all Pick n Pay cashiers, right? But I know that I'm not going to have access to all Pick n Pay cashiers. I may have access to all Pick n Pay cashiers I might have access to them. It's a more accessible number, so that would be called our accessible population. Shouldn't a brand represent this? Otherwise the whole company as a whole is not seen positively. Yes, correct. That's a more general view, right? But obviously we know that on the ground, not everyone in a company represents the values of the company, or just is aligned with the company practices. So if we're wanting to study, it's not necessarily the company that we're studying, right? It's more the people. In this particular example, maybe I should say it's more the people that we are studying, that we are interested in. Okay, so that's our population. And then we go into the element, or what is an element? Is essentially the unit or case about which information is obtained. So that sentence really wasn't well written, and I just got it from the study unit. But yeah, essentially the element are the people, are your specific people that you are using in your sample. They are elements. So it's not just people, it can also be objects. For example, if you're studying the rate of how certain trees grow, and you want obviously to get a sample of trees, the tree is your element, just like your people can be an element, just like an event or a group can be an element. So the individual thing that you're studying, that's the element, and all your elements together is then what makes up your population. So if we just think about the broader group is our population, of the broader group, the people that I can access is my accessible population. And then the individual units that I am studying, those are my elements. So yeah, I suppose you can just think of the people as elements. That's a good way to remember it. And then we have the parameter, and we're told that the parameter is the characteristics obtained by studying all the elements of a population. So for example, the ages, or for example, the years of experience of the cashiers, right, that I am looking for specifically. So I basically put a parameter on it, or if we think about the word parameter, it's sort of like a border, right? A boundary around what exactly I'm looking for in the people that I want to be part of my sample, or the people that are part of my population. So it's the specific characteristics where I broaden it down and say, oh, I need people. One of the parameters for this population is people with at least 5 years of experience in Pick and Pay, right? Or people who are in management positions in Pick and Pay. Or so parameter is just another way for you to clearly define your sample and your population, and as a result, your sample, right? So parameter essentially is the characteristics of your elements, and your elements make up your population. Sorry, makes up your sample, and then your sample makes up your population. I hope that hope that's not too confusing. All right, and then we have what we call the sample, and I think we've already talked about that. We said that the sample essentially is a part of the whole, or a small subset of a bigger group, a bigger population. So I suppose if we're looking at something very simple like a cake, the whole cake is our population, but then we take a slice of cake and that's the sample, sort of like a taster of the whole cake. And we know that when we're eating that slice of cake, that it represents the whole cake, that the way that this slice tastes is how the whole cake tastes. And so ideally that's the goal with sampling, right? We want the small piece that we take to actually be able to represent the whole. So that's what we talk about, representative. That's a very key aspect of sampling, that your sample needs to be representative of the whole. The characteristics of the people that you choose in your sample need to reflect the general characteristics of the people in the whole population, because essentially we want to be able to generalize, right? I want to say that, oh, this cake has a rich, creamy chocolate taste. I think I'm hungry. But yeah, I should be able to say that just by eating the slice. I shouldn't have to eat the whole cake to come to that conclusion. So the same way, if I'm saying that these cashiers are, highly skilled in what they do, if I take that conclusion based on the sample, it should ideally represent all the other cashiers. Of course, we can't really ever get 100% representativeness because of the nature of humans. Like, if two people who have this exact same characteristics might still differ in certain ways, right? No two people are the same, and that's why in research we're not really trying to get exact. We're just trying to get a general representation of the sample. So I think I jumped here a bit, but yeah, so that was a representative sample, where it says that means a sample that resembles the population in as many ways as possible. And that's key there, as many ways. It has to be as similar as possible, and it allows the researcher to accurately generalize the results that they get. So just to move one up, is we talk about the sampling frame. And the sampling frame is more a comprehensive list of all the units or elements in the target population. So now we've already looked at what the element is. It's like each individual unit, right, in our study. So each individual unit in our study. So a sampling frame means I need to have some document that captures every single person. So this is why I say probably a document that has all the cashiers, right, of Pick and Pay on the list. That's my sampling frame. That is everyone that will make up my population, not my sample, but my population. Similar, if we're looking at nurses, I think this is one of the examples in the study unit. If we're looking at male nurses in South Africa, then, you know, at least we know that to be a nurse, you need to be registered with, you know, the health department. So we can get a list of all the nurses. So we can get a sampling frame, which lists every single registered nurse, male nurse. Yeah, every single registered nurse we can get on the list, and that will be our sampling frame, right? See a question here. Would systematic sampling be the most accurate way to sample a population, depending on what or who you're researching? So I think the answer there is at the end, Amy. It really depends on what or who you're researching. All sampling techniques, I believe, are really only as accurate as the situation that we're using it in. And yeah, maybe we'll see that as we get to that stage of the material. But I don't think there's one technique that is better than the other. It's just a case of how well does it work for what the researcher needs to do, and what the researcher's circumstances are. Okay. And then we have sampling error. So we know that research, just like any other human endeavor, is not void of errors. And what we can come across a sampling error in that, sorry, let me just get to it, which refers to the difference between the population parameters, and we said that parameters is really just the characteristics of our population, right? So sampling error refers to the difference between population parameters and sample statistics. So if I'm saying that in my population, amongst the male nurses that I'm looking at in my population, are male nurses, registered male nurses, the average age, for example, of these nurses is 35. And then I get my sample, or I select a sample, and I find that the average age of the people that in my sample are 30 years old. So therefore, there's a sampling error of 5. Yeah, there's a sampling error there because it's showing us that our sample doesn't really reflect the population accurately, because it really should have been also that the average age of the people in my sample are 35, you know, because we want the sample and the population to basically be the same. So we are told that a sampling error is maybe unavoidable, you know, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the researcher has done something wrong. It's just one of those things that you can't really control every element of the research project, of the research stage. So there are various ways, or there are various reasons why we could have a sampling error. And, you know, some of them are listed here. So it's chance factor, bias in selection, or non-response errors. So if we look at chance factors, we are told that in particular sample, some elements may have been included instead of others. And this, when we say chance, it just happened. It was unfortunately one of those random errors where someone was added to the sample that should not have been added to the sample. Someone else should have been added, and the addition of that person actually skewed the result of the sample. So we're told that this type of error is called chance factor and can be calculated statistically, but of course we're not going to, and it's not part of this module, I believe, to look at those calculations. Then we've got sampling bias. Oh, sorry, I skipped bias selection. I skipped that. Bias selection really, I think, as the word suggests, is when the selection is biased, I suppose. Yeah, so the researcher might have said, okay, I'm going to choose these people, not realizing that their internal biases is making them choose particular people. So, for example, if I'm looking at the attitudes of students for like their attitudes towards maths, I may have this implicit bias to select the students who are doing well in maths. And obviously, if someone is doing well in something, they will usually have a more positive attitude to it. So that's where a selection bias or bias in selection comes in. Sorry. Yes. And then we've got a Then we've got non-response error as one of the causes of sampling errors. And non-response error is basically telling us that some people are not going to answer the query, the questionnaire, or they will decide not to join in the research. So as a result, you're not going to get that full representative sample, because there are people who would have made up that sample that would have added to the study, but they just didn't. They just decided not to. So therefore, that impacts your sample to a certain extent, right? And then we talked about sampling bias, which refers to the overrepresentation or underrepresentation of a segment of the population, which will impact the purpose of the study and its validity. Right. So with sampling bias, we're saying that this is one of those cases where your sample is not representative of your population, mostly because the sample maybe wasn't carefully selected. So we're saying then that the researcher kind of failed to consider various factors when selecting the sample. So for example, something that they could have forgotten to take into account was the language used when the data was collected. Yeah, when the data is collected or when you're getting your sample. So you put out a survey and you're asking for people to join, and the thing is the tool is in English, but there are many people whose home language is not English. So already in that way, you exclude those people from joining. So that if you're getting people who mostly are English home language speaking people, then your sample is not going to be representative, because the country or that company, that community does not only have first language speaking people. So that affects the validity of the study. Extent to which your personal views influence the data. That's another thing, like I said in the previous section, that if you know that particular students are good at maths, you will most likely want to select them for your sample. And this is, of course, and we'll look at now probability versus non-probability sampling. If this is a non-probability sampling, you'll probably set those who you kind of have an idea of what or how their participation would affect. And then the time that the data is collected is something that will also affect the people that you'll get for your sample, right? Because if you're studying extracurricular, the people's interest in extracurricular, and you're looking at high school children after school, and you collect the data after school, right? Or even students who can't stay after school to, participate in the study. Maybe students that need to, go get public transport, or they have, a personal threat in time. So immediately those students are all excluded. So you're not getting a representative sample then, because of the time that the data was collected. Only certain people, certain kinds of students were available for that. And then the place where the data is collected. That again, if you are collecting data and you're saying, oh, we're going to go to town, you are going to waterfront to collect the data. You just want to get whoever you get in that space. It's going to be a very different, it's going to be a very different profile of people who would be at 12 o'clock. You know, if we think about who would be at waterfront at that time, it would mostly be like retirees, people that are on holiday. You know, it won't be your average person, because your average person is probably at work at that time. And on a Thursday, people at work, people at school, people at varsity. So the people that you're going to get there are not going to be fully representative of your sample, of your population, right? So in this case, you'll have, like we said, a underrepresentation you'll have an underrepresentation of the average everyday person, and you'll have an overrepresentation of maybe tourists and retired people, because they are the ones who find themselves in that space at the time and the place that you are collecting your data. Okay, are we all still together? Cool. Okay. All right, so some more, Right, so then we move on to the essentials of sampling. And we are told that to ensure that your sample is drawn, that the sample that is drawn actually represents the population, there are two important factors that we need to consider. And the first one is that your group is either, your population is either homogeneous or heterogeneous. Sorry. And that essentially means like how different or similar is the population from each other, right? So we're told that a population that consists of people who are similar to each other is a homogeneous group or homogeneous population, and then a population of people who are dissimilar or different to each other are called a heterogeneous group. Sorry. So essentially, the more alike or the more similar the people in your population are, the more your sample will be representative, right? If we just think about it, I think the example that we had is if I am studying high school hockey players, female high school hockey players, those are three characteristics, or I can even add age, 16-year-old female hockey players, right, in high school. So that is 4 characteristics that is the same. And if I say in Goodwood, that's 5, because it means that everyone in the study is going to be female. They're going to be 16 years old. They're going to be in high school. They're going to be in this community, in this area, in the same geographical area, right? So that group is very homogeneous. They're very similar to each other, which means if that's my population, if I get a sample from that, they're most likely going to also just be very similar. So it's most likely that my sample is going to be representative of my population. But on the other hand, if my group is not homogeneous, if it's heterogeneous, I think that's the way to say it, then you know, I have a less chance of getting a sample that is representative. So if I say that, okay, I'm going to UNISA and my population is UNISA students, yes, it's a defined population, But if we think of all the differences between UNISA students, we begin to see that it's going to be very difficult to get a representative sample, right? Because what are the differences would be people are at different levels, different years. It's undergrad, postgrad, first year, second, third year. You get males and females. You get older students, more mature students. You get younger students. You get students who are in Cape Town, you get students who are in Joburg, all over the country. You get students who are full-time students, you get part-time students. So there's just too many differences, right? In the one population group, they're all UNISA students, but there's so many differences between them. By the time I get a sample, so if I say, fine, I'm going to get a sample of UNISA students, the sample that I get, the people that I get may be so completely different from everyone else. I might get 5 second-year students who don't work, who are full-time students. 3 of them are male. I can't say that that's representative because how many UNISA students don't fit that profile, right? So the information that I'm going to get from those students is definitely not going to be representative of what all the other students are experiencing. So essentially, we are then told, or we get that how homogeneous a population, or the more similar a population, the less people I need in my sample, because I'm not going to get anything very different if I have 20 high school 16-year-old hockey player girls versus if I get like 100. If they all have the same profile, I'm most likely going to get the same information from them, right? But if I get only 5 UNISA students, maybe their experiences are completely different from the, 20,000 other UNISA students that they are. So that means I need more people. I need more people in my sample, just for the chances that, okay, maybe I'll get someone that actually represents the UNISA students who are part-time students, or maybe I'll get someone who represents those who are in undergrad and those who are in postgrad, so the more people I get in my sample, the more chances I'll have that there will be some sort of representation, right? So yes, that is one of the key points we look at in terms of the population. That is how similar they are to each other. And then the second important thing is the degree of precision with which the population is specified. And that's when, what we said is, how specific is your population. Saying UNISA students only is not specific at all. It's very broad. It's going to make it very difficult to get a representative sample, but a more precisely defined population, will give us a more representative sample. Yeah. So we're told also that when a sample is drawn from a poorly defined population, it's likely going to be biased, right? Because that UNISA population, if I choose 5 people, it's most likely going to be biased because it's going to be the people that I can access. If I'm in Cape Town, then it's going to be people in Cape Town, which means people in all the other provinces are not accounted for in my research, right? It's going to be biased. It's going to be the people who maybe I found at the Paro campus, which means I immediately exclude everyone who did not go to the campus that day, right? So yeah, it's quite biased in that way. Right, are there any questions? Okay, so then we move swiftly on to, I feel like I am going through this quite fast because I wanted to be really mindful of our time. So I just hope that I'm not going too fast and that we are still on the same page. Okay, so we have then a number of, we then start asking ourselves, how do we go about collecting samples? How do we get to a point where I say that, okay, I have my sample now? What are our sampling techniques? So we distinguish between two techniques or two approaches, which is probability or random sampling and non-probability sampling. So probability sampling is really, random sampling. If we just think about it, if something is random, it means that everyone or every element, remember we said elements, every element has an equal chance of being chosen to be in the sample. So random sampling will mean any UNISA student will have the chance of being selected as a sample, right? So essentially it's also called equal chance or non-zero chance, sampling method, right? So everyone should have a chance. There's no hopefully, or the assumption is that there are no biases because, it's going to be completely random. The researcher won't really have a say in who gets chosen. Everyone will have a chance to get chosen. And there are four sampling techniques that are presented under probability sampling, and we'll look at them closely now. The first one is simple random sampling. Then we've got systematic sampling, we've got stratified random sampling, and cluster sampling. So I want us to just watch this quick video that explains very briefly each of these, and then I think I will just go I'll just go and break it down a little bit or briefly based on what we've got in our study unit, because I want that to be our frame of reference. So you'll please let me know if you can see my screen and if you can hear. I need to add sound. Sound. Okay.
Sampling: simple, convenience, systematic, cluster, and stratified. To find things out about a population of interest, it takes to take a sample. A sample is a selection of objects or observations taken from the population of interest. For example, a population might be all apples in an orchard at a given time. We wish to know how big the apples are. We can't measure all of them, so we take a sample of some of them and measure them. The method chosen for taking the sample depends on the nature of the population and the resources available in terms of time and money. The ideal is for each object in the population to be equally likely to be chosen as part of the sample. This is called an unbiased sample. It is also desirable for the sample to be representative of the population. If the population of apples were 2/3 red and 1/3 green, the sample should be similarly split. Note that no matter what we do, there will always be sampling error or variation due to sampling, as we are looking at a part of the population, not the whole population. The video on variation covers these concepts more thoroughly. This video presents 5 methods of sampling: simple random sampling, convenience sampling, systematic sampling, cluster sampling, and stratified sampling. For each method, we will outline the process and the advantages and disadvantages. Simple random sample. Simple random sampling is theoretically the ideal method of sampling. You list each member of the population and use random numbers to decide which objects are in the sample. Each object is equally likely to be selected. This produces an unbiased sample, which we hope is representative. However, it can be difficult and expensive to take a simple random sample when dealing with people. Simple random sampling is more practical when the population is geographically concentrated and when a good sampling frame exists. A sampling frame is a list of all the people or objects in the population of interest. Simple random sampling can be more easily implemented for natural and manufacturing populations. Convenient sample. Convenient sampling is just that, convenient. You ask people nearby or people who walk past at a shopping mall. Or you take the next 20 objects off the production line. You do what is easy or convenient. Convenient samples are often biased in some way, but for a quick and cheap poll, it may not really matter. Convenient samples can also have self-selection bias when people choose to participate because they have an interest in the issue in question. Systematic sampling. With systematic sampling, you choose a starting point at random and then systematically take objects at a certain number apart. For example, if there are 1,000 in the population and you want a sample of 50, you would take every 20th object. Systematic samples are easier to administer than simple random samples and are usually a good approximation of a random sample. However, if there is a pattern in the population, certain types of objects could be chosen more or less often than others. Cluster sampling. In cluster sampling, the population is divided into clusters which are then chosen at random. For example, departments of a business can be clusters or suburbs within a city. Within each cluster, all of the objects are included in the sample. Cluster sampling can be more convenient and practical than simple random sampling. However, if the clusters are different from each other with regard to the elements we are measuring, it can lead to bias or non-representativeness. Stratified sampling. Stratified sampling seems like cluster sampling, but the strata or groups are chosen specifically to represent different characteristics within the population, such as ethnicity, location, age, or occupation. Within each group, a random sample is taken, sometimes in proportion to the size of the group. Stratified sampling can lead to a very good random representative sample. However, it can be complex to administer, and a sampling frame with considerable information about the population is required. There are other sampling methods. The 5 explained here give an idea of the advantages and disadvantages of various methods. You should attempt to use the sampling method that produces the best result for the resources you have available. If your sample has known bias, this should be taken into account in analysis and reporting.
Okay, so I hope that helped to just give us a nice introduction into what we're going into. Let me just see. Okay, so Alyssa had to leave. That's fine. If we look at the number of COVID cases per 1 million, how can these positive cases be? Yeah, so I mean, I'm not sure, and maybe everyone else can chip in. Everyone else in the session can maybe chip in with that. I think with the COVID case, it's not necessarily sampling that they're doing. I think that they are taking every individual case. So that's my thinking, that they're counting every positive case. But how? Yeah. So they're counting every positive case is my understanding. Yeah. I'm not sure if anyone else actually has some thoughts on that. It would be interesting to hear. Okay. So I think as we heard now from these 4, and I think she also mentioned convenience, which is not one of the probability sampling techniques. It's actually non-probability. but all the others are probability and simple random. As if we think of very simple, like study unit, they say like the lottery or the fishbowl techniques is you give everyone in your population a number, or maybe a number, and then you put that number in a bowl and you choose. So you determine that if I have 100 students, that's my population, I want a sample of 25 students, right? So then, you put numbers 1 to 100, and in this case, you need to have a sampling frame, because you need to have essentially a list of everyone that's going to be in your population. So then you will give every student a number from 100. You'll put the numbers in a box, and it's random, 25 numbers. So whoever gets chosen then forms part of the sample. And in that way, we see it's very simple and it's very random. So it's simple random because anyone could have gotten chosen, right? Okay, it's this person, I'm going to choose that person. No, everyone had an equal chance to be chosen in that technique. So that's the simple random technique. Then the systematic technique involved, and you'll probably hear this, involves sort of, it's also called interval sampling. So maybe make a note of that. And this involves drawing every F or every F element from a population. So basically, we want to select people at certain intervals. So again, if you have a list of all these students, you have a list of 100 students, you calculate your nth, and you need to calculate your sampling interval, right? And I wish I could. This is one of the sessions where I really like being in class, because then we can just put it together quite nicely. But I hope you'd be able to follow with me. So we have a list of 100 students, and now we need to determine a number of things. Firstly, I need to determine how many people are in my population. That's big N, right? I'm on page 157. If we can follow along. So I need to determine how many people in my population, N, and in this case, we're saying that 100 people, right? We have 100 people in our population, so that's big N. And then I need to determine how many people I want in my sample. And I've said now that I want 25, right? So it's 100 for big N, 25 for small n. Small n is our sample size. Big N is our population size. And now I need to determine my sampling interval. And the sampling interval is really just saying every how many people, am I going to choose for my sample. So we'll do this by calculating your population size by your sample size, So it's big N divided by small n. So it's going to be 100 divided by 25. Which will give us 4, right? So then I'm going to say that every 4th person on my list, on my class list, is going to be selected for the sample. So I'll start with 0, or I can start at random. Actually, I think it's recommended that you start at random. Okay, if I'm every 4th is going to be a select, so I'll take person number 2, and then I'll jump 4 people, and then I'll take person number 6, and then I'll jump 4 people, and then take person number, right? Do we follow? So every 4th person will be selected. It's still random, but yes, everyone still has a chance, but now it's a little bit more systematic. It's not completely random. You need to have fallen in a particular position to actually get a shot to be in the sample. Right, and they tell us that this systematic sampling is actually more convenient than simple random sampling, because it gives you sort of a system to work with. And you can sort of justify how you came about to selecting the people that you selected, right? And then we've got, so something that I have seen in exams is, knowing how to calculate your interval, and being able to also sometimes work back. So they'll give you the interval and they'll give you the sample size, and they'll ask you, what was the population size, or so just stuff like that. I think I would just make a note of it and see that you can use it. I mean, it's a very easy formula, K interval, so K equals to population size divided by sample size. But sometimes they'll give you one value, and you need to sort of work back and calculate and find what was, or they'll give you the data and they'll ask you like, what was the interval? So you just need to know how to work back. It's not anything hectic, but yeah. And then we've got stratified random sampling. And stratified random sampling is where our population is divided into two groups, right? So that each element of the population belongs to only one stratum. So the groups are called the stratum singular. So then we do a random sampling within each group. So for example, I have my 100 students, and then I say, but actually I want to get random samples, but I want it to be in proportion to the population. So I'll divide them, into male and boys. Within the sampling, and then the people that I get from the girls group and the people that I get from the boys group will make up my full sample, right? So it's sort of a more ordered way of random sampling. Okay. And then we've got cluster sampling, which is very similar to stratified, except that with cluster, the groups are not the same. So for example, in stratified, you'd see that the groups are the same. So it's all boys in one strata, all girls in one strata, and then I do random selection in each. But with cluster, they're not the same. So it would be, still 100 students, but in one group it's the grade 11s and the other group is the grade 12s. I'll then go ahead and do a random sampling of the grade 12s and random sampling 11s. So I hope the difference there is clear. So with stratified, it is a homogeneous group. We divide them into homogeneous groups, and then we do random sampling. With cluster, we divide them into heterogeneous groups, and then we do random sampling. Is everyone done? Okay. So there is just the table that was in our study units that just talks about the conditions under which this technique, a certain technique, will be used. So yeah, I think that the question you had, Amy, it will depend on what conditions your study falls under, that you will decide what to use or what not to use. So for example, systematic sampling should ideally be done when a list of the sampling frame is available, right? I have a list of all the students. That way I can actually go in and have them all in a list and then select every 4th or every 8th student because I have the list. But if I don't have a list, then that's not going to work, because what basis am I selecting them on, you see? So yeah, it really does depend on the conditions of the research. Right. And then we move on to non-probability sampling or non-random sampling. So with non-probability sampling, as we hear, it's more, yeah. So it's not that everyone will have a chance of being selected. It's actually very specific people will be selected, and it's a sampling approach where the population may or not be accurately represented. So it's less desirable. So it's usually not the best approach to use because if the objective of the research is to generalize, I can't generalize something based on a sample that I hand selected, because then the people that I selected most likely won't represent the whole population. So in non-probability sampling, the researcher's judgment is often used to select the people that will be chosen, or the people who have characteristics that are relevant to the research. So it's up to me as a researcher to say, actually, I think this person might work, that person might not work, they don't have this, or they have this, and this might affect, the findings. So that's why it's not really recommended. But of course, again, it depends on the type of study. If your study is not to generalize, if that's not what you're trying to do, if you're just trying to describe something that's happening, then I think it's okay to use non-probability. But if you're really trying to generalize something, ideally it should be random sampling. So we have 3 types of probability sampling. The first one is, we heard in the video, is convenience sampling or accidental. And convenience is really, as it sounds, who can I get easily, sample the people that I can get easily. So if I walk into UNISA Paro campus, I'm going to choose the first 5 people who I give a form to and who say yes, right? So that's convenient. It's just the easiest way of getting samples. But of course, the problem is I can't generalize, because the people who I found at the campus may not represent the whole student population, right? It's a very particular type of student that will go to campus, that has the time to go to campus, that has the means to go to campus, right? Most students are not going into campus. So yeah, that's why you can't really generalize. And then we've got quota sampling. And quota sampling is similar to stratified sampling, except that the final selection is not random, right? So I'll still put people in groups. I still have my 100 boys and girls, my 100 students. I'll divide them into boys and girls, but in the selection of which boys and which girls I'm going to take, that's not going to be random. That's going to be according to a quota, or like certain requirements that I want. So if I find that, okay, this group of female students, I'm going to say, okay, from this group, I want maybe each race to be represented, right? So it's not going to be random, because I'm going to be specifically making sure that I have a white student and a black student and an Indian student and colored student, So it's like you're trying to meet a certain quota to make sure that, a certain type of characteristic is reflected. So what's specified, it was that I divided them into boys and girls, and then I chose anyone. But with quota sampling, it's like I divide them into boys and girls, and now I want certain characteristics to be represented. So then that's how I'll do my final selection. It won't be random, right? And then purposive or judgmental sampling is also referred to as theoretical sampling. And this is when you select a sample that can be judged to be representative of the population. So as a researcher, you think that these people will actually represent the population. So you go and you basically handpick, they say you handpick the elements, right? Or you handpick the people that are going to be, or you handpick the days that you want to do to collect your data on. So for example, if you're doing a study on students who are maybe socially awkward, and you think, okay, this is what a socially awkward student looks like, then you will go and literally ask only those type of people who kind of meet your checklist. So you'll ask them only to be part of the study. And it's usually used in qualitative research, because, you know, we were looking for a certain profile, and we want to add or contribute to theories about the social sciences. So you'll find that it's not really that we're trying to make a generalization. We just want to describe, or we want to add to the theories, or add to, the theories about a certain thing. So that's why it's okay to, I guess, go and handpick people, because you want these people to be able to contribute to the theory that you are trying to put forward. Okay, and then finally we have snowball sampling, and I mean, this is one of the easiest ones, I think, also because it kind of stems from your purposive sampling, right? So if I said, okay, I think this student is maybe not the socially awkward student. Let's see. If I'm looking at students that speak more than 5 languages, right? So that's a criteria that I have, and I identified these students, and I went and I asked them, do you want to be in my study? I'm looking for people who speak more than 5 languages. Yes, they will. Now, with snowball sampling, I can then, if they know someone who also speaks, more than 5 languages, because mostly people with similar characteristics will always know someone who is like them. So then we basically are using your participants to help you get more participants. So they will tell you, oh yes, my friend Johnny, he also speaks 5 languages. And then you join the one, and then Johnny will say, yes, Stephen also down the road, and then you go and ask him. So it's sort of like a snowball, I suppose. You're just getting more participants from your participants. And they tell us that snowballing is also really effective for studies of issues. So yeah, just because people will trust someone that they know already, for example, workers or patients, and these are just examples that I get from the study unit. So if I interview a sex worker, it's going to be easier for me to get access to another sex worker through this sex worker, right? Because she will be able to tell, she or he will be able to tell the next person, listen, I did this interview, don't worry. So you basically get that social, you're playing on the social capital of the people, so that, they tell, they recommend, and then, they would most likely be more open to actually doing this study with you, because someone that they know spoke of it already, right? So that's quite a nice one. Are there any questions? I'll check. No questions. Okay. So a short table that is found in our study unit, and again, it tells us which conditions we would use certain techniques. So, for example, like I said, snowball sampling, you'd use it when it's a research in which participants are difficult to be identified or difficult to locate or socially devalued, right? Even someone like people who you won't find easily. That's the thing. If you get one person, then you essentially, that person will help you find more people, because they, there are these communities, and they always know someone who knows someone who can also be part of the group. Yes, and then convenience, we said, of course, is if you want to you want to get a group that's easily accessible, like you don't have too much time. For example, if you've got a very tight deadline, you need to produce this research in 3 months, you can't spend too much time putting out surveys and looking for specific people. You essentially say, I only have 1 day to collect data, so I'm going to go to this place and I'm going to interview whoever agrees to interview with me, right? So it all depends on the nature of the research. All right. And then finally, wow, I think we did really good with time. Finally is our sample size, and we're told that really the sample size refers to the number of elements in our sample, of course. So it's small n in that calculation. And so the larger the sample size, the more valid and accurate the study. I think we touched on this as well, because the more people you have in your sample, the more likely they're going to represent your population. And your population, the people in your population have similar characteristics, then you can use a smaller sample, because you're not going to get any different type of result if all the people have the same characteristics. So you don't need a huge sample size. We're also told that if a sample with too large, or a study with too large a sample, will actually be unnecessarily expensive and time consuming, and it won't make your research more accurate. So you don't need to have, if your population is 100 students, there's no reason you should have a sample size of 80 students. That's just unnecessary, and it doesn't add to your research in any way. So, at best is a 25 element sample. Right, and then, however, a study with a sample that is too small may not provide the required information and may be useless. So I suppose it's one of those things where you need to really strike a balance between, how many people you want in your sample, how many people are in your population, how similar are the people in your population, and that will determine, how many people you choose for your sample. But essentially, you want to ensure that your sample is key to sampling is you want to ensure that it is representative, and that, so that will be determined by what you're looking for, and that will determine how big or small your sample is. Right? Are there any questions? I feel out of breath because I feel like I really ran through that. So we do have a few minutes. If there are any questions, I'm really more than happy to go back and maybe clarify any points. Right. Thanks, Fiona. I really tried. Yes. So I think just to wrap up is that key again to what we would cover today as sampling, what it is, how it is, why it's important, and what the key characteristics of a good sample is, and how that relates to our study. We looked at the sampling techniques of probability sampling, non-probability sampling. And we said that, you know, each of these techniques has its place in different types of research, depends on what you're wanting to do with your research. And that will also then determine the size of the sample, and it will determine, you know, how similar or different your samples are. We also said that it is important to have a clearly defined population from the get-go, because your population will determine your sample. So if you don't define your population, then anyone can make it into your sample, and then that distorts the data that you get at the end of the day. Okay, I see a hand. Kudzanai, sure, what's your question? You're welcome to unmute your mic. Oh, sorry, that is your question. How do we determine the right sample size? So yeah, we're told that that's really to the discretion of the researcher. So you'll determine, and I think you can look at things like how much time you have, because remember your sample size, if you're doing interviews, you need to determine how much time do you have to conduct interviews. I think you also look at what your population size is, and what the aim of your research is. So if you're wanting to generalize, if the aim of your research is to make generalizations, we are told that you kind of need a large sample group, right, so that you can make generalizations. But if it's only to describe something, or you want to give insights or explain, you know, the characteristics of a particular phenomenon, or want to just explain what's happening in the Kensington community, your study is just to explain that, you know, to give people an idea of what's happening in the community. Descriptive study, then you really need a large sample size, because you can speak to maybe 10 people and they will give you insights of what's happening, and you can write up on that. But if you want to make a generalization about, you know, the high school dropouts, then you probably need more data. So there are a number of things. Those are the kinds of things you want to ask yourself as a researcher when you try to determine your sample size, and also just what is feasible. What can you, as a researcher, get to? Can you get to interview 20 people with the time that you have and the budget that you have, or do you only have space to do 10 interviews? So yeah, that's really up to you as a researcher. Is that okay? Awesome. If there are no other questions, Claudine did post the feedback form at the end. So if you'll just scroll up, please fill that out so that we continue to know how to make these sessions better for you. And yeah, with that being said, we will continue with unit, I think it's unit 8. No, sorry, unit 7. Oh, I am jumping the gun here. So we will do unit 7 on Wednesday, and that's looking at data collection. So that's one of the more exciting parts of the module for me. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to us going through that. Please, if you can, read through it in advance, make notes, make pointers of anything that you don't understand or anything that you really want us to go into a little bit deeper, so that I can also do that for you guys. So yes, if there isn't anything else, please fill out the evaluation form, and I will see you guys on Wednesday. Thank you so much and have a lovely evening. Thank you. Hi, Adele. No, the recording wasn't stopped.
Hi there.
Hi.
We've been struggling with recordings now the past few days. They just stop by themselves.
Really?
And I can't see, you see, I can see the recording was started and I checked that, but I don't see where it ended. And I don't see any evidence of a recording running through and being stopped.
That's strange, because I mean, from my side, I still see that the red dot. So
can you still see it?
yeah, so that it is recording.
Okay. Let me try this.